So the Mega Drive was starting to get a little long in the tooth in 1993. It's worth remembering that the idea of a console generation lasting the thick end of a decade is a relatively new one. Back in the early days, technology was advancing at such a pace that generations were generally expected to be around 4 to 5 years, and the Mega Drive is 4 at this point. Even the SNES, which is a year younger, was starting to show its age given how it was struggling to run Starwing, which was very clearly the way the future was going in terms of 3D graphics. Basically, the signs were pointing towards a new refresh of hardware across the board, but nobody was ready to jump at a new machine just yet, so we saw some really interesting ways of extending the lifespan of the current tech, particularly from Sega. Cartridges as a storage medium were really out of date at this point too, and as difficult as it might be to believe now, the entire world was orienting itself towards the humble compact disc, or CD, as the physical medium of choice. It was already being widely used in the world of the PC. Philips had released the CDI in 1991, a sort of multimedia machine, and people had seen how much storage could be increased using this technology.
A single CD can hold as much information as 80 cartridges or a staggering 800 floppy disks.
You could have movies and music and photos on CDs, which meant there was a lot of potential for making much larger and more complex games. So this is what Sega focused on, releasing the Mega CD in the US in 1992 as the Sega CD, and in Europe as the Mega CD, its proper name, in 1993. It was an add-on for the Mega Drive, so you needed a Mega Drive to use one, but it meant that you could use your existing setup to play CD-based games that held the promise of fully recorded music soundtracks, fully voiced characters, and full-motion video footage, as well as some modest advancements in processing power that ultimately would never really be used. It was a very pricey machine and a gamble at the time because there wasn't a lot of software available for it, but it felt like the future to me. I was so excited about it. It's difficult to communicate these days because each new hardware iteration now is such a minor improvement over the last one. The law of diminishing returns has completely taken over computer entertainment in 2024, but in 1993 this was a massive leap forward. But what did I play on this magical machine from the future?
Take off!
A port of an old Mega Drive game from 1991, obviously. Look, the machine was expensive, okay? I wasn't going to be rushing out and buying a load of new games for it. I had to milk every bit of enjoyment I could out of the 2 pack-in games that came in the box. And one of them was this side-scrolling space shooter called Sol-Feace. I've never liked shooters. I just never got into them. I always found them too difficult. As a wuss, wimp, kiddie, filthy casual, every shooter seemed to me to be an exercise in getting through the first couple of minutes, then dying, losing all your power-ups, and then it being impossible to make up the ground, as the number of enemies and bullets on screen became increasingly unhinged. And on top of all that, there usually wasn't even a compelling narrative pushing me to get better and go further. No promise of any cool end screens or story beats, so I never really stuck at one. Until this one. To my own benefit, I was kind of forced to stick at this one. The other pack-in game with the CD was Cobra Command, which was a good showcase of the visuals of the Mega CD, as it was essentially an interactive anime cartoon, but it was very short and quite limited in its actual interactivity, which meant I spent the majority of my time playing this one, learning the enemy patterns, learning where to put my ship and at what time, using the music as a timing guide, and ultimately understanding why other people had been enjoying shooters all along. I started to get it. Now let's not get it twisted, I was still utter shite at it. I never got past the 3rd stage, and a lot of what drove me on was not just the feeling of learning and getting better, but also the fact that the CD technology allowed for a much more appealing presentation than I was used to. The game opens with this extended anime sequence, with the main characters preparing the ship, and they had real voices. Real voices were a big deal on a home console in 1993.
We could be in for a battle with the Star Garrison at 5 locations on our way to Earth.
Be on the lookout when we near Sirius. The weapons plant on the outer rim of Sirius, the artificial sun, the Pluto base in Jupiter.
There was a fully narrated backstory about this killer, oppressive AI, and the story and characters really drew me in a way I'd never experienced in a shooter before. These were all additions specifically for this CD version, as was the absolutely banging soundtrack. I mean, listen to some of this. You wanted to play the game just to listen to these tracks, they were so good, and the whole thing just felt like a next level gaming experience. It's worth mentioning that the difficulty was also rather more forgiving than I was used to in contemporary shooters. Each time you lost a life, the game gave you some immediate power-ups to get you more or less back to where you were in terms of the power level, not entirely, but mostly, which kept the game feeling fair for longer, and it was usually relatively simple to learn the patterns of the bosses. Also, there were no additional complexities like enemies that are only vulnerable to particular weapons, like what you'd find in an Ikaruga or something like that, so you could just concentrate on shooting and evading. I appreciated that simplicity as a novice to the genre, and it kept play sessions more fun than annoying. This is another one of those time and place selections, and Sol-Feace isn't going to feature on a lot of people's list of the best games of all time. But it's on mine because I appreciate it as an on-ramp for shooters in general, and it was a nice introduction to some of the advancements made possible by the Mega CD, particularly in the soundtrack department. It's definitely worth checking out over the original Mega Drive version.